We don't serve people like you here." The bank manager slapped the black woman. The slap echoed throughout the bank lobby, causing everyone to fall silent. A police officer approached. "Ma'am, put your hands up." What happened? What did the black woman do wrong? What if the man who slapped her in the face had just ruined his career because of it? Follow this story of power, justice, and revenge. Like and subscribe for more powerful stories. Alina Westwood sat in her sleek, glass-walled office on the 50th floor of Westwood Capital Group in downtown Manhattan, staring at the acquisition papers for Liberty Trust Bank. The ink had barely dried, yet the weight of history pressed down on her like a stone. To the outside world, this was just another business move, another power play from a woman who had built an empire from the ground up. But to Alina, this was personal. 30 years ago, this very bank had denied her grandmother, Patricia Evans, a home loan. It didn't matter that Patricia had perfect credit. It didn't matter that she had saved for years. It didn't matter that she met every financial qualification. What mattered, at least to the bankers at Liberty Trust, was the color of her skin. And because of that, Alina's grandmother had never been able to buy her own home. That rejection had kept her trapped in a cycle of renting, pouring money into landlords' pockets instead of building generational wealth, wealth that could have been passed down, wealth that could have changed their family's trajectory. Now, decades later, Alina owned that bank, but there was something she had to do first. Alina didn't just want to own Liberty Trust Bank. She wanted to fix it. But how do you fix something you haven't fully seen for yourself? Over the years, she had read reports on racial discrimination in banking. She had seen the statistics, how Black and Latino applicants were more likely to be denied loans, given worse interest rates, or steered toward high-risk financial products. She had listened to stories from colleagues, friends, and even strangers, recounting how they had been treated differently at the bank counter, how they were told to check the website while white customers were invited into private offices. But she had never experienced it herself. That was about to change. Her plan was simple: 3 days, 3 visits to Liberty Trust's Chicago branch. Day 1, she would walk in as an average black woman looking to open a checking and savings account. Day 2, she would return with all the necessary documents and observe how they handled her application. Day 3, she would inquire about a business loan and see what excuses they came up with to deny or delay her request. She would go in with no assistants, no bodyguards, no personal drivers, just her and a small leather purse. She wouldn't wear her usual custom-tailored power suits or diamond-studded watches. Instead, she would blend in. She wanted to see how they treated a regular black woman, not a CEO, not a billionaire, not a woman who could ruin them with a single phone call. Because if the system was broken, she wasn't going to just fire people. She was going to expose it and change it from the inside out. The morning before her first visit, Alina stood in front of her full-length mirror, examining her carefully selected disguise. Gone were the designer heels and power blazers. Instead, she had chosen navy blue slacks, a simple white blouse, and a cardigan she had bought from a department store, an outfit that wouldn't stand out in a middle-class setting. Her hair, normally styled into sleek waves or elegant updos for corporate meetings, was covered with a plain headscarf. She replaced her signature luxury glasses with simple contact lenses. She looked at herself and barely recognized the woman staring back. And that was the point. The woman in the mirror wasn't Alina Westwood, CEO of a $10 billion company. She was just Alina Evans, a middle-class consultant looking for a place to do her banking. For 3 days, she would erase her power, erase her privilege, and step into the shoes of someone who had neither. But she knew that no matter what she wore, no matter how she spoke, one thing wouldn't change: her skin color. And that was exactly what she wanted to test. Her assistant, Lisa Carter, was the only one in her executive team who knew about the plan. Lisa had been with Alina for 10 years, and she had seen firsthand the discrimination Alina faced, even at the highest levels of business. But this was different. "You know this is risky, right?" Lisa had asked, leaning against Alina's desk the day before the visit. "I know," Alina nodded. "What if someone recognizes you?" "They won't," Alina said confidently. Lisa gave her a look. "You're one of the most powerful black women in finance. People know your face." "Not like this," Alina replied, gesturing to her plain clothing. "Without my suits, without my jewelry, without my name, I'm just another black woman, and that's exactly how I need them to see me." Lisa exhaled, shaking her head. "I still think we could have hired mystery shoppers instead." "Mystery shoppers won't feel what I feel. They won't hear the tone in their voices, see the looks, or feel the weight of being dismissed. I need to live this experience myself." Lisa hesitated. Then, finally, she nodded. "All right, just promise me one thing. If something goes wrong, you'll call me." Alina smiled. "Lisa, you know me. If something goes wrong, I won't need to call. They'll know who I am soon enough." That night, Alina sat in her luxurious penthouse overlooking the city, sipping tea as she mentally prepared for what was coming. This wasn't just about proving a point. This wasn't just about gathering evidence. This was about justice. For her grandmother, who had been robbed of her dream of homeownership. For every black customer who had been treated as less than. For every person who had walked into a bank expecting fair treatment, only to be met with subtle, calculated discrimination. She had no idea what would happen over the next 3 days. She didn't know if they would simply ignore her. She didn't know if they would refuse to serve her. She didn't know if she would face outright hostility. But what she did know was this: at the end of it all, they would regret underestimating her. Tomorrow, she would walk into Liberty Trust Bank not as a billionaire CEO, but as a regular black woman. And by the time she left, she would have everything she needed to tear their system apart. The morning was crisp as Alina Westwood stepped off the subway in downtown Chicago, the cool autumn air nipping at her skin. She tightened the cardigan around her shoulders, adjusting the plain white blouse and navy slacks she had carefully chosen. Liberty Trust Bank was just ahead, a grand, imposing structure with marble columns and gold-accented doors, a symbol of wealth and power. It looked exactly the same as it had 30 years ago when her grandmother had walked through those doors, only to be told she wasn't qualified for a home loan. This time, Alina wasn't here as a billionaire CEO. Today, she was just another black woman looking to open a bank account. She took a deep breath, pushed open the doors, and stepped inside. The lobby was immaculate, filled with rich mahogany counters, polished floors, and leather seating areas. She immediately noticed the difference in treatment as she walked in. A white businessman in his 50s entered the bank at the same time as her. Before she could even reach the main counter, a bank associate rushed toward him with a warm smile. "Good morning, sir. Right this way. I'll take you to a personal banker immediately." Alina watched as he was guided past the waiting customers and into a private consultation room. She stood there for a moment, unnoticed, before finally walking up to the main counter where a young teller, Aiden Fox, was stationed. "Good morning," she said politely. "I'd like to open a checking and savings account." Aiden hesitated. There was a flicker of discomfort on his face, as if she had asked for something unreasonable. Instead of offering to connect her with a banker, he slid a brochure across the counter. "All of our account options are listed here. You can apply online. It's much faster." Alina glanced at the brochure, then back at Aiden. "I'd prefer to speak with someone directly," she said. Aiden sighed, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. His eyes darted toward Daniel Carter, the customer service manager, who was seated at a large desk near the private offices. Daniel barely spared Alina a glance, then leaned over to whisper something to another employee. They both snickered. Aiden cleared his throat. "Our bankers are currently busy with appointments, but you can always come back another day." Meanwhile, Alina noticed that a white woman who had entered after her was immediately offered a personal banker. She wasn't angry, not yet, but she was taking notes. She gave Aiden a polite smile and said, "Thank you. I'll be back." As she turned to leave, she caught Daniel Carter watching her with narrowed eyes, his expression unreadable. Alina returned the next morning, this time armed with every piece of documentation imaginable. She had her driver's license, social security card, recent pay stubs, tax returns, utility bills. She had everything that should have made opening a simple checking account a seamless process. But she knew better. She entered the bank at 9:45 a.m., slightly earlier than the day before. Once again, she saw Daniel Carter at his desk, chatting with a banker, occasionally scanning the lobby. This time, instead of going to the main counter, she approached the reception desk. "Good morning," she said with a polite smile. "I was here yesterday about opening an account. I brought all my documents and I'd like to proceed today." The receptionist hesitated. "Do you have an appointment?" Alina tilted her head slightly. "I was told I could come back today to complete my application." The receptionist sighed, glanced at Daniel Carter, then picked up the phone. "One moment. Let me see if someone is available." Alina stood there, waiting, while she watched 3 white customers arrive and get helped immediately. After about 5 minutes, the receptionist put the phone down and turned back to her. "I'm sorry, but all our bankers are currently busy with existing clients. If you'd like, you can submit an application online and someone will reach out." Alina didn't budge. "I'd prefer to speak with someone in person." The receptionist shifted uncomfortably, but before she could answer, Daniel Carter walked over. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, looking at the receptionist instead of Alina. "No problem," Alina answered before the receptionist could respond. "I was told I could return today to open an account, but it seems like your bankers are still unavailable." Daniel folded his arms. "We have policies in place to prevent fraud. We'll need to verify your income, your employer, and conduct additional background checks before proceeding." Alina raised an eyebrow. "Fraud," she repeated, her voice calm. Daniel didn't flinch. "It's standard procedure for customers in high-risk categories." Behind him, she watched as a white man in his 40s was guided into an office with a banker, without any verification required. Alina let out a slow breath. "All right," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "I'll be back." Alina entered the bank for the 3rd time, this time with a new request. She wasn't asking about personal banking anymore. She was here for a business loan. At the reception desk, she stated clearly, "I'd like to speak with someone about business loan options. I have all my financials ready." The receptionist barely looked up from her computer before saying, "Our business loan specialists are booked today." At that exact moment, a white businessman in business casual attire walked in. Before Alina could even react, Daniel Carter himself rushed over to greet him. "Mr. Davidson, good to see you again. Hear about that expansion loan, come right this way." Alina felt her blood boil. She had seen enough. She took a slow step forward. "Mr. Carter," she said evenly. Daniel turned, annoyed at her persistence. "Yes. Why is Mr. Davidson getting an appointment immediately while I was told there were no specialists available?" The room went silent. Daniel's face darkened. "Ma'am, I think you're causing a scene," he said coldly. "If you don't leave now, I'll have security escort you out." Alina didn't move. "I just want to understand your policies. Do white customers have different standards?" That was the moment Daniel snapped. His hand shot out, striking Alina across the face. A loud slap echoed through the bank. Gasps filled the room. Several customers pulled out their phones, recording the scene as Alina stood perfectly still, her cheek burning from the impact. Daniel, realizing what he had just done, stepped back in shock, but it was too late. Because the moment his hand landed on her, he had just sealed his fate. For a few frozen seconds, the entire bank lobby was silent. The sharp echo of the slap still lingered in the air, bouncing off the polished marble floors and brass-accented walls of Liberty Trust Bank. Alina stood motionless, her face burning from where Daniel Carter's hand had struck her. Customers gaped in stunned disbelief. Some were outraged, some uncomfortable, but most simply stood there, unsure of what to do. Daniel, his chest rising and falling rapidly, stepped back, his expression flickering between rage and panic. He had lost control, and now every phone in the room was recording it. Then, like a man trying to reclaim his power, he did what people like him always do when caught in the wrong. He weaponized the system against her. Daniel's face twisted into something vicious, something calculated. He straightened his wrinkled suit jacket, squared his shoulders, and pointed at Alina as if she were some kind of threat. "I've already called the police," he bellowed, loud enough for everyone to hear. People in the lobby flinched at the aggression in his tone. "We don't serve your kind here." He spat, his voice dripping with hatred. Alina felt something deep inside her coil tightly, not in fear but in fury. She had expected discrimination. She had expected resistance. But she hadn't expected violence. And now he was flipping the narrative, twisting the truth right in front of everyone's eyes. "She was aggressive," Daniel continued, his voice rising. "She refused to leave when asked. She tried to hit me first." Several of the employees nodded along, avoiding Alina's gaze. Others shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of the lie but too afraid to contradict their boss. Aiden Fox, the young teller from Alina's first visit, looked pale, his fingers gripping the counter. His eyes darted to the security cameras, then back to the growing tension in the room. But nobody said a word. Because that's how these situations played out, wasn't it? A white man in authority made an accusation. A black person was expected to be the problem. And the system, flawed and predictable, would do the rest. The wailing sirens outside shattered the silence. Through the glass doors, the reflection of flashing red and blue lights bathed the lobby in a chaotic glow. 2 Chicago PD officers entered the building with purpose. Officer 1 was an older white man in his late 50s, with a weathered face that spoke of decades in uniform. His hand rested near his weapon, his eyes immediately locking onto Alina, not Daniel. Officer 2 was younger, also white, mirroring the posture of his superior, his expression already set in stone. Behind them, Officer 3, an Asian American woman, hung back slightly, watching with a careful, calculating gaze. Daniel, rejuvenated by their presence, stepped forward quickly. "Officer, thank God you're here," he called out, his voice dramatic, theatrical, like he had rehearsed it in his mind. The older officer nodded curtly, glancing at the growing crowd of onlookers. "What's the issue here?" Daniel wasted no time. "This woman has been causing a disturbance," he said, jabbing his finger toward Alina. "She refused to leave when asked. She got aggressive, and when I tried to de-escalate, she physically attacked me." There it was, the exact script Alina had anticipated. Daniel even had the audacity to rub his jaw as if Alina had actually hit him. The older officer turned to Alina, already reaching for his cuffs. "Ma'am, I need you to put your hands where I can see them and step away from the customers." His tone left no room for argument. Alina felt her pulse slow, not in panic, in clarity. They hadn't asked for evidence. They hadn't checked the security cameras, they hadn't questioned anyone else. They had walked in already convinced that she was the threat, because that's how the system worked. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The police officers were already moving toward Alina, waiting for her to comply. But then, a voice cut through the silence. That's not what happened. It was a white woman in her late 40s standing near the loan department. She held up her phone, recording everything. "I saw everything," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "He slapped her." Daniel froze. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Another customer, a younger black man near the entrance, raised his phone as well. "I got it on video," he said. "She never touched him, he hit her." A third customer, an elderly white man, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "I don't know what kind of bank this is, but I'll be closing my account immediately." A domino effect. People who had been silent just minutes ago were suddenly finding their voices. And Daniel, he was sweating. His face, once red with anger, was now draining of color. The lead officer's brows furrowed, and for the first time he hesitated. "Sir," he turned back to Daniel, "we're getting conflicting reports. You're saying she assaulted you, but multiple witnesses are saying the opposite." Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. "They're mistaken." "Then let's check the security footage," Officer 3, the Asian American cop, suggested. Daniel's jaw clenched. His mask of confidence was slipping. As the situation teetered on a knife's edge, Alina finally moved. Not toward the police. Not toward Daniel. She reached into her purse slowly, deliberately, and pulled out her phone. "Ma'am, I need you to put that down," the younger officer started. Alina ignored him. She dialed one number, put the phone on speaker, and held it up for the entire room to hear. The line rang twice before it was picked up. A crisp, professional female voice answered, "Miss Westwood, we're ready." "Do you need us there now?" Silence. Confusion. Daniel's face twisted in bewilderment. The police officers exchanged glances, suddenly aware that something wasn't right. Alina's voice was calm, almost amused. "Yes," she paused, her eyes locked on Daniel's. "I need you here now." And just like that, the entire atmosphere of the bank shifted. Daniel didn't know it yet, but he had just lost everything. The bank lobby was a battlefield of silence. The tension was so thick it felt suffocating, a moment of limbo, a held breath before the inevitable collapse. Daniel Carter stood frozen, his confident smirk from earlier wiped clean off his face. His jaw clenched, eyes darting between the police officers, the customers still recording, and Alina, who stood calm, composed, completely in control despite everything. Then, like a thunderclap, the heavy glass doors of the bank swung open. A gust of wind followed as three sharply dressed individuals entered with an air of absolute authority. The room shifted instantly. Everything about them, their posture, their expensive suits, the purposeful click of their heels against the marble floor, spoke of power. A woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes and a navy blue Armani suit led the way. This was Desiree Lawson, Alina's head of corporate affairs. Behind her, a silver-haired man with a leather briefcase strode in, a top attorney from Westwood Capital Group's legal team. To his right, a younger South Asian man, tablet in hand, was already pulling up security footage and banking records, one of Alina's senior financial officers. They moved as if they owned the place, because in reality they did. A ripple of confusion swept through the bank staff. Tellers whispered to each other, their faces flickering between curiosity and panic. Security guards tensed, uncertain who they should be taking orders from now. Even the police officers hesitated, glancing at each other, sensing something was off. Arthur Green, the branch manager, visibly stiffened at the sight of the newcomers. He was a man who had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, protecting men like Daniel, brushing aside complaints, ensuring that nothing changed. And now, standing before him, was the embodiment of that change. Alina Westwood took a slow, measured step forward. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, each step a warning, a countdown. She came to a stop, standing directly in front of Daniel Carter, her piercing gaze never leaving his face. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm, unwavering. "I am Alina Westwood," she said, her words crisp, deliberate, and loud enough for everyone to hear. Then, the final blow, CEO of Westwood Capital Group. She let it sink in. "And I OWN this bank." The color drained from Daniel's face instantly. His knees looked weak, his entire body locked in place like a man who had just realized he had dug his own grave and was now being handed the shovel. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Arthur Green, standing nearby, looked equally horrified. His hands gripped the edge of a nearby counter, as if he were steadying himself against a tidal wave that was about to crush him. Customers gasped, murmurs rushed through the room. The young teller, Aiden Fox, let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Phones were still recording. And this was about to go viral. Desiree stepped forward smoothly, handing Alina a sleek black folder with the Westwood Capital logo embossed in gold. Alina flipped it open with precision, revealing official corporate documents, signed contracts, and acquisition papers with legal seals. She extended them toward Daniel. "You can take a look if you'd like," she said, voice eerily polite. Daniel's hand trembled as he reached out, taking the documents with the same hesitation as a man being handed his own termination letter. His eyes scanned the pages. Westwood Capital Group had bought Liberty Trust Bank weeks ago, which meant he had been working for Alina this entire time, and he had just slapped his own boss. I didn't know," Daniel stammered. His voice cracked, his usual swagger gone, replaced with pure, unfiltered fear. I swear, it was a misunderstanding, I thought." Alina didn't blink. "You thought I was just another black woman you could disrespect?" she asked, tilting her head. Daniel's mouth opened and closed, his face pale and clammy. Customers watched in fascination, some with vindication, others with complete disbelief at what they were witnessing. The power shift was so absolute, so undeniable that everyone in that room felt it. Alina took a single step closer. Daniel flinched. Her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, yet somehow everyone could still hear her. "You sealed your fate the moment you slapped me." Daniel visibly trembled. His career over. His reputation destroyed. His power gone, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing, he could do to change it. Arthur Green, the cowardly branch manager, suddenly stepped forward, plastering on a nervous smile. "Miss Westwood, had we known who you were," Alina's gaze snapped to him. "Who I was," she echoed, her voice like steel. Arthur froze mid-sentence, realizing he had just made a fatal mistake. "So you're admitting," Alina continued, "that my treatment would have been different if you knew my name." Arthur backpedaled instantly, stammering. I didn't mean," but it was too late. He had just confirmed what she had suspected all along, that their discriminatory treatment wasn't about policies or procedures, it was about power. And now they had none. Alina turned to Desiree, giving a small nod. Desiree immediately addressed the police. "Officers will need full access to the bank's security footage. This is now a corporate matter." The older cop rubbed his jaw, realizing this situation was far beyond anything he had expected. He turned to Daniel. "Sir, do you have anything to say about the assault now that we have multiple witnesses and proof that this woman is, in fact, your employer?" Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out, because what could he say? The entire world had just watched him destroy himself. And the worst part, Alina hadn't even raised her voice. She had simply let him dig his own grave, and then handed him the shovel. As the weight of his mistake crashed down on him, the realization was clear. Daniel Carter was finished. Alina Westwood stood tall, arms crossed, watching Daniel Carter crumble before her eyes. The man who had barked orders, looked down on customers, and slapped her in front of an entire bank now stood there, stripped of every ounce of power he once wielded. His mouth opened and closed, struggling to form words, but what could he possibly say? He had just learned the unshakable truth. The black woman he had dismissed was his boss. The person he had tried to get arrested owned everything. And now she was about to take it all away from him. Alina turned to Desiree, her voice sharp, decisive. "Fire him." The words hit like a hammer, shattering whatever last hope Daniel had of escaping the situation. "Wait, please," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Miss Westwood, I made a mistake. If I had known—" Alina tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "If you had known I was the CEO, you wouldn't have slapped me. You wouldn't have called the police on me." Daniel's face twitched, sweat pooling at his temples. "No, I mean," Alina held up a hand. "Enough." Her tone was lethal, final. She glanced at the security guards who had been watching everything unfold wide-eyed. "Escort him out." Two uniformed guards immediately moved toward Daniel, grabbing him firmly by the arms. He jerked, trying to resist. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice rising in panic. "I'll sue. I've worked here for years." Alina simply lifted a perfectly manicured brow. "And yet you threw it all away in seconds." Daniel flailed as the guards dragged him toward the exit, his once pristine suit now disheveled, his tie loosened in desperation. As he passed by the customers who had witnessed his downfall, a wave of murmurs and hushed conversations filled the room. One woman, a black mother standing in line with her teenage son, shook her head in disgust. "This is justice," she murmured. When the doors finally slammed shut behind Daniel Carter, the bank erupted into a strange, eerie silence. It was over, but Alina wasn't done. Because Daniel Carter hadn't acted alone. He had been protected, and the people who enabled this kind of discrimination, they were about to be held accountable. She turned her gaze to Arthur Green, the branch manager who had stood silent, refusing to intervene even when he had seen everything unfold. The man visibly paled, gripping the edge of a desk as if it could save him. "Miss Westwood, surely we can discuss this." Alina's tone was calm even, but her words were merciless. "There's nothing to discuss. You allowed this culture of discrimination to exist under your leadership. It ends today." Arthur stammered, his years of corporate maneuvering failing him now. I had no idea Daniel was going to." Alina's gaze cut through him. "You knew exactly what was happening. And you let it continue because it benefited you." She turned to Desiree. "He's gone too." Arthur stiffened, his face contorting in anger. "I've given this bank 26 years of my life." Alina didn't blink. "And in 26 years, you never thought to challenge the system that kept people like me out." Silence. Arthur's chest heaved, but he knew there was no arguing with her now. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Alina barely glanced at him. Doubtful. Security stepped forward once again, and Arthur Green was escorted out the door, but there was one more name on Alina's list. She turned to Helen Morris, the loan officer who had been consistently denying black customers fair financial assistance. Helen hadn't said a word this entire time, but her fingers were white-knuckled against her desk, as if praying she could fade into the background. "Miss Morris," Alina said smoothly, her voice almost mocking in its politeness. "I assume you know what happens next." Helen swallowed hard, her face ashen. I was just following the bank's policies." Alina let out a soft chuckle. "Well, let me make this easy for you. I just rewrote the policies. You're fired." Helen's lips trembled, but she didn't argue. She simply gathered her things and walked out, head lowered in shame. With the old regime dismantled, Alina turned to her executive team. "Now we rebuild." Over the next few days, everything changed at Liberty Trust Bank. Discriminatory lending practices were completely abolished. Transparent service protocols were put in place to ensure fair treatment for all customers. New hiring policies were implemented, focusing on merit, ethics, and diversity. The bank underwent a massive cultural transformation. And the results? In just 6 months, Liberty Trust Bank saw a 38% increase in revenue. More minority customers, who had long been excluded from financial opportunities, opened accounts and applied for loans. The bank went from a symbol of exclusion to a beacon of financial equality. And for the first time in its history, Liberty Trust Bank actually lived up to its name. Alina Westwood stepped through the glass doors of Liberty Trust Bank, 6 months after the day she had been slapped and humiliated in this very lobby. But today, everything was different. A black woman in her 60s was sitting with a banker, discussing a home loan application with full respect and attention. A young Latino entrepreneur was being walked through business loan options, without unnecessary hurdles. A South Asian father and his daughter were opening a joint account, receiving the same level of service as everyone else. Alina watched it all unfold, feeling a quiet sense of victory settle in her chest. This was the same bank that had once denied her grandmother a loan. But now it was a place of equal opportunity. Now no one would be dismissed because of the color of their skin. She took a slow breath, letting the weight of the moment settle in. She had come here to expose discrimination, but she had done so much more. She had torn down an unjust system, and in its place, she had built something better. With a small, knowing smile, Alina straightened a painting on the wall that had been crooked for months. A small act of ownership, a final symbol that this bank now belonged to the people it had once excluded. Then, with the confidence of a woman who knew exactly what she had accomplished, she turned and walked away. She didn't need to say anything. The legacy she had built would speak for itself.